Webtoons are Korea's latest cultural phenomenon, and their global popularity appears to have taken a life of its own. For more on this, I have Thomas Maresca, Asia correspondent for UPI, here in the studio. Thomas, it's good to see you again.
Great to see you.
I also have Rob SALKOWITZ, senior contributor at Forbes, live on the line. Rob, it's a pleasure.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Right, Thomas, let's begin with a few words on the origin of the term Webtoon, which was coined here in South Korea, I believe, and on perhaps the size of its industry.
Yeah, so I guess it's about 20 years old. The first platform that actually used the term Webtoon was by Daum, which was a web portal, later has merged with Kakao, and Naver, which operates the biggest Webtoon portal now, came around in about 2004. At that time based on computer screen still and, scrolling comics though. But I think in the 2010s with the emergence of the smartphone is when Webtoons really sort of came into their own and almost became this new medium, of just the scrolling, single panel kind of format. And it's grown tremendously, in recent years especially. Latest number I've seen domestically in Korea, it passed the 1 trillion won mark in 2020. It's like 800 million US. Globally, I've seen some market research reports that pegged it at around 3.7 billion globally, and projections are quite high over, one thing I saw was over 56 billion by 2030. And, even within Korea, that 2020 number was like a 65% growth from the year before. I think the COVID pandemic boosted a lot of online industries. But, it's been growing at home and internationally really tremendously.
Right. And Rob, last month you shared an extensive piece on Naver Webtoons' efforts to further expand into the US market. Could you tell us a bit about its plans to pay millions to its creators to make mobile comics and about the response there to these intentions by Naver Webtoon?
Sure. I think it's an important step toward changing perceptions because here the platform is still emerging. It's very popular, but inside the mainstream comics publishing industry, I don't think it's very well understood. And people look at a platform that has a lot of user-generated content, and they may assume that the creators on that platform either aren't paid or aren't paid very well for the work that they're doing. And, it's a competitive market for talent. So it's very important for a company like Webtoon to make sure that people understand this is professionally produced content, and the people that are doing it have opportunities to monetize and sometimes make a really good living. I think in the industry, people may have been a little bit surprised about the amount because 27 million US is about what a mid-tier comics company would pay for a year's worth of content from professional comics creators. And that puts Webtoon's position in the market in a context that other people in the industry can understand, and they can look at it and say, oh yes, this is a serious player.
Right, I see. And Thomas, also last month, news of a Webtoon published by Naver being lauded at the Eisner Awards made local headlines here. Could you tell us a bit more about the significance of this latest recognition?
Yeah, it follows on what Rob said, I think, in terms of this was a symbol of kind of a mainstream acceptance. The Eisner Awards are one of the major US-based comic industry awards, sort of the Academy Awards of comics, I guess. And the fact that a Webtoon-based product, Lore Olympus is the name of it, by Rachel Smythe, who's from New Zealand, won the best web comic category. It was the first time a Webtoon took that award. And so obviously it's a step towards, understanding and accepting in the mainstream. And, by the way, though, that particular Webtoon also made it to the top of the New York Times bestseller list and published in a graphic novel format and won some other, the Harvey Award and other major comics awards. So that's been a show of success for the platform in the mainstream.
Right. And against that backdrop, Rob, what look to be the broader implications, if I may, of such market expansion by Naver on the US comic industry as a whole?
Well, the impact has really been positive. For years, the US comics publishing industry has been talking about expanding the market and trying to get younger, more diverse audience, but they haven't really been able to do it. And Webtoon is delivering on that. So that's a net benefit for the entire industry. From an economic perspective, as Thomas was talking about, the US comics industry last year all up, digital, print, graphic novels, comics, everything was about $2 billion US, all put together. In that same time, Webtoon says it made nearly $1 billion US in their worldwide operations, which means that one company is accounting for half of the economic output of the entire US comics business. So it's not a company that people that are in the industry are used to thinking about because it's an app, not a publisher. So one of the things that Webtoon is doing is creating relationships with print publishers, like DC Comics, for example, trying to cross-pollinate the traditional audience for US superhero comics and things like that, bring them onto the Webtoon platform, and then also bring this exciting young new audience that they're developing on their own app into the rest of the business to keep everything healthy.
Right. Thomas, with regard to South Korea's Webtoon industry to expand its presence beyond national borders, I understand that we introduced India to the world of Webtoons. What more can you tell us about the local industry's efforts to expand into foreign markets beyond that of the US?
Yeah, it is a growing global operation. Naver, from what I've seen, I think they count their monthly user base as 82 million subscribers now, and 75% of those are overseas. And so, right, the US is still, I think, the largest single market, but as you mentioned, India, there was a company called Cross Comics that was formed by a Korean entrepreneur based in India that was taking Korean-made content and translating it into 3 languages there. They actually just got absorbed by Kakao, and they co-produced one of the recent Netflix adaptation called Business Proposal. So we're seeing a lot of, cross-pollination. Japan, which obviously has its own very well-established manga and anime industry, Korean platforms dominate their market for Webtoons as well. There's a Piccoma is the Kakao branded one, and Line is the Naver brand, and they account for like 70% of the Japanese Webtoon market. Southeast Asia, there's growing popularity. I think in some Europe, France, there's been interest. So, we'll probably discuss it as well, but it really kind of coincides with other K content that is, expanding its reach around the world.
Right, it really does, and we will get to that soon.
Yeah.
Rob, your article asserts that Naver Webtoon now counts the US as its fastest growing market. How do you explain the popularity of Webtoons published on Korean platforms among international audiences?
Well, I think Thomas was right that, Americans, like everybody else, are being captivated by this explosion of creativity coming out of Korea, whether it's K-pop or K-dramas or, films like Parasite, and that includes the manhwa and comics. So I think the association of that and the fact that so much of this media in other ways is being developed from these platforms has got people curious. The thing about the U.S. market and the reason that it's growing so fast is it was starting from a low point because, I think through most of the teens, American consumers were, 5 or 10 years behind South Korea in how we use our mobile devices for entertainment and services. And so while Webtoon was growing in South Korea and Asia, the U.S. market was just kind of sitting there doing nothing. So as Thomas said, there's a U.S. company that was fairly successful called Tapas that was acquired by Kakao last year. And Kakao paid quite a bit of money to acquire that company, I think precisely because they had figured out good strategies for the North American audience. And this was a way to come to eye level with Webtoon. But if you ask anybody under 25 at this point, there's no question about the popularity of the Webtoon format and the Webtoon platform. It's just how people read comics now.
Right, good to know. Thomas, in sharp contrast, the popularity enjoyed by Webtoons now, just 25 years ago here in South Korea, comic books were considered harmful to youngsters. They said the comic books nurtured a culture of profanity and obscenity. Do you care to elaborate on that?
I did a little bit of research into this, and it looks like it dates back to like the 60s, this anti-comics crusade as something that's, dangerous or corrupting of the youth. And I guess there used to be these comic reading rooms in Korea where kids would go. They're almost library-like places to read. And that was also the first place that TV started to pop up. So I think they were seen as these dens of, poor influence in places that would drag you away from studying. And there were a few high-profile incidents with kids that had, one, I think in the 70s, there was a kid who accidentally committed suicide trying to imitate one of his comic characters, and that sparked a big moral outrage, mothers against comics, that kind of thing. And yeah, as you mentioned, I think there were public comic book burnings into the 90s. Interestingly, though, a lot of people within the industry here talk about the 90s as kind of a low point of comics in Korea, partly due to the IMF financial crisis and there was an influx of Japanese content. And I think that set the stage for the rise of this new, what became the Webtoon platform, because there was creators wanted somewhere to go, and here we are.
Right, we are. Rob, on the Webtoon front, and on a personal note, what are some of your favorites? And would you say then that the fact that these Webtoons are available on mobile platforms makes reading them a more enjoyable experience, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm an old guy. I'm not the target audience. I'm a traditional comics fan. I like the full page reading. So I look at a lot of this stuff for my work because the business side of it is very interesting. And then I start reading. And of course, Lore Olympus, which just won the Eisner Award, is really clever and beautifully drawn. I think it deserves all of the awards and popularity that it's getting. There's one called Let's Play by Leanne Krejcik that I think is being adapted for a television show here in the States that is kind of a workplace comedy, slice of life, about a woman who works at a video game company. I was just at San Diego Comic-Con, and I did a panel on Webtoon with some of the executives and creators. One of the creators on that panel goes by Instant Miso, and she does a strip called Eternal Nocturnal, which is sort of urban fantasy. And it's just beautifully drawn, and this is her third strip, and she's really mastered how to tell the story in that vertically scrolling format. And it's just a different mindset. But the creators that have come up doing that kind of work are now getting really, really good at it, and it's become almost its own medium.
Right. Now, Thomas, as Rob mentioned, moving forward, there are some of our most popular K-drama series in recent days have been adapted from Webtoons, my personal favorite being Itaewon Class. We also have Hellbound and All of Us Are Dead, which my daughter enjoyed tremendously. Have you seen them? And what are your thoughts on this collaboration, which you mentioned earlier, which includes K-pop artists as well, pop artists, singing on the original soundtracks?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's kind of becoming, I think a lot of the players in the content industry just are looking at the whole thing as this IP universe where there's just complete overlap between them. But yeah, I mean, that when you mentioned Itaewon Class and Hellbound, like that's sort of what got me a little bit interested in Webtoons, because I had seen the series and, had heard about Webtoons, but hadn't looked into them. And I was curious, what was they were the origins of these shows. How does that translate? And yeah, it seems to be a really natural fit. Some people I've talked to in the industry here talk about the fact that the Webtoon format is so well suited towards adapting screen content because they're almost like storyboards for a film or a TV. And as you mentioned, also K-pop has fallen into the mix. There's a BTS-inspired Webtoon called Seven Fates, and they did the a soundtrack song for that, and other K-pop acts have contributed. Now there are songs that are soundtracks to Webtoons, and we're just sort of seeing this cross-pollination of these universes. And even the flip side is happening, where a popular show like this Extraordinary Attorney Woo Young-woo, which started as a TV series, is being adapted into a Webtoon. So there's really quite a three-dimensional, 360 degrees.
Right, cross-pollination, as you said. Rob, what are your prospects with regard to Korea's Webtoon industry, and what government support do you believe would serve to perhaps further boost the industry's expansion overseas, especially as the new administration here seeks to sharpen the country's cultural appeal?
Well, I think they've already got a really strong and competitive product, and it's a really successful formula. They're attracting readers, they're attracting creators, they're integrating with Wattpad, which is this fiction platform that they acquired last year, and turning it into this conveyor belt to turn all of this user-created content into big media properties. So I spoke with the CEO of Webtoon last year. He has a real vision for the company, and best of all, he's got a real passion for comics. So I think that's the right idea. in terms of government support, that's kind of a tricky question because, the U.S. does not typically give government support to cultural businesses. And so it may raise issues in the industry that's already kind of becoming aware of a competitor to realize if the competitor was being subsidized by a foreign government, that may actually hurt them more than help. But that said, the numbers show that just executing on their current strategy is enough if they're making these kind of market gains. I think the webtoon industry is looking very good in America for a long time to come.
Right, and staying with that then, Thomas, what are your thoughts on prospects, well, future thoughts on Korea's webtoon industry going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still in kind of an early stage, amazingly, as much as it has been done already. I think I would be remiss to not mention there are some issues as well within the industry. As much as content creators are getting paid in certain cases very well, there's a lot of people working at the margins, and with the growth of the popularity, it's a common thing you hear from creators here anyway, is being overworked, underpaid. There was a very high-profile death of a webtoon artist from the webtoon Solo Leveling recently that some are tying to the sense that the idea that maybe it was overwork, which exists, in other sectors in Korea and around the world as well. So that's also something that has plagued the anime industry in Japan. So that's something to watch. I mean, I think the equity of the industry still needs to sort of get sorted out. But generally speaking, it's really a platform that, it really almost is its own medium, I think, now. And you can just see how far it can really go.
Right, and far it can go as long as it takes care of those less privileged. All right then, Rob, thank you. Thomas, that is, thank you so much for your time today. And Rob, over in the US, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, pleasure.